All right, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks, who had a very eventful offseason, right? And so I kind of wanted to break it down player by player and talk about the many decisions they made and maybe where to go from here. How do we feel about the franchise as a whole? So, yeah, let's just get into it. I think first things first, I have to just go with, let's look at PFF grades as to where they ranked last year according to PFF. So, according to PFF, losing Geno Smith hurts. He was the 7th highest graded quarterback last year. They will not have him this year. Although it's also worth mentioning, Sam Darnold was not far behind. Sam Darnold was at 9, so they're definitely not like, a wild difference apart. We'll kind of get more into that decision a little bit later. Also, the receiving core was very good last year at 8th. Of course, they're losing Metcalf and adding Cooper Kupp, which is going to change things. Offensive line just wasn't good, no denying that. The running game was good. The rushing was, if you isolate the offensive line into blocking, that part was good, even if the blocking wasn't great. And in defense was kind of middle of the pack in pretty much every category, again, according to PFF. So looking at this, I think what most people would do is say, okay, let's just pump resources into the offensive line. That is not the way Seattle took this. So let's go over to who they lost. And this is not everyone they lost. These are the players that they lost who have signed new teams. Next, we'll talk about the players that they currently have lost, but maybe they could still recover if they chose to. So players that they definitely are not getting back. First, Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, which again, we can debate how good those players are, but those were two of the most valuable pieces of this Seahawks team for the past several years, and not having them on the roster, this is just going to completely change how they are. For my personal belief, I think Geno Smith is a very good quarterback. I agree with PFF that he's probably a top 10 quarterback, and they're banking a lot on the Sam Darnold move working out, which we'll talk about. Metcalf as well. Again, I think is a very good player, and I do think that they're losing something with losing Metcalf, although they did get a pick, and they did get Cooper Kupp, which, again, we'll talk about. And they don't have to pay, they're saving money by doing that as well. For the other pieces that are still worth mentioning, Draymond Jones, who has kind of constantly, I feel like, been overpaid. He had some good years in Denver. I thought Seattle gave him a bit too much, so ultimately they decided to move off of the contract there, which I think is it makes sense. Roy Robertson-Harris, again, these are both interior defensive linemen, Jones and Robertson-Harris. So, I don't know if either of them I would say are like superstar players. Still, guys that, you're a little bit weaker now in that area. Also, they lost offensive lineman Laken Tomlinson, who was a solid player last year. So for their offensive line already had some issues, especially at the guard position. Laken Tomlinson was actually pretty good, at least solid as a guard. Losing him hurts, and could hurt that whole situation. Of course, a big part of the problem was Stone Forsythe, who's also on this list. He had to play, and he's really a depth piece that, quite frankly, just isn't very good. So having him have to come in because Abraham Lucas got injured, that hurt the offensive line. Getting Lucas back will help, but losing Tomlinson will hurt. And again, I'm not saying Tomlinson's a star, but just a player who now you have to replace. Also, they had Trey Brown leave, who's a depth defensive back. So, outside of the top two, nothing massive, but some other holes they're going to have to figure out here. As for the losses that are still free agents, there isn't that many here. Tyler Lockett's kind of the big one. Of course, they got rid of him, so it does sometimes happen where you cut a player and then re-sign them because it still just makes the contract, make something work. But rarely that happens. He's probably going to be going somewhere else, but I still put him on the list here. But again, he's a piece for them, even if he's not coming off his best year. He is a piece for them. Rayshon Jenkins is a safety who played about 500 snaps last year, has kind of bounced around, played with the Chargers, played with Jacksonville. Again, a fine player, nothing special. They're not devastated to lose him, but was still someone who, you'll have to replace those 500 snaps, right? George Fant, who, has played for a decent amount of teams and been decent, but only played 30 snaps for the Seahawks last year, essentially didn't do much. And then Jason Peters, who is technically a free agent here, did not play at all last year, only played about 200 snaps in 2023, which was last year with the Seahawks, is 43 years old. So, okay, probably not really even something I had to put on the list, but I did anyway. And then finally, we can't talk about the Seahawks without bringing up who they got as well, because they weren't just lively in terms of who they were letting walk out the door, but also in terms of who they were bringing back into the building. So they traded away Geno Smith and signed Sam Darnold. A lot of people are saying, isn't this at best a lateral move? Their argument, I'm assuming, is that if it's a lateral move, well, that's actually probably a good thing because first off, you got a draft pick, so that helps. Granted, you don't make a quarterback decision based on a third round pick. Quarterbacks are just so important that wouldn't move the needle in any way. But if you feel like this is a lateral move, you do get the pick, and Geno Smith's 35, Sam Darnold is 27. So you're essentially getting 8 extra years of quarterback play, which if you're trying to keep your job, that's 8 extra years of having a contract probably. So adding Sam Darnold is potentially huge. In the question that is just going to, we'll have to wait and see is, was Sam Darnold a product of his system last year with the Vikings, or is he legitimately just this good and he's figured something out? We don't know, right? I mean, I would say like with Baker Mayfield, which is a comparable thing to look at, he didn't change teams, but he did change offensive coordinators and essentially offensive systems, and was still able to be good once he kind of was in a better situation. So I don't know. The one thing that would concern me is Darnold. I think the one issue he still had in Minnesota was holding on to the ball too long. This offensive line, especially the interior, on paper doesn't pass protect well. That would concern me. DeMarcus Lawrence, again, it should be an interesting piece for them. A player who obviously has reached high highs with the Cowboys. He also talked smack about the Cowboys on the way out. Ultimately did not get much, has kind of struggled to get playing time a little bit, but has been good on the field. 2023, he was very good when he played. So, is a good player there. Obviously, the receiving core is going to be very different as well. They added Cooper Kupp, who isn't coming off of his best year. He just isn't. But ultimately, I still think is a pretty solid player, and I thought that was kind of a sweetheart deal, so don't hate that. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling, we'll see. He's very fast. That helps. He can win in certain ways. He has played in a lot of big games, but ultimately, what is his ceiling? Probably not too high. And then just a couple of interesting pieces. So Josh Jones is a tackle who is a player who kind of has only been good at left tackle, which you almost never see, right? Because usually if you're only good at something, it's because you got moved around. They've tried to move him around, and really he's only been good at his natural position, which is left tackle, which, hey, that's a good position to be good at. But they have a tackle. Honestly, their tackles are fine. If Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross are good, they're fine. The guard situation is not great, and that might be where Jones has to play, and he's not great there. So I don't know how much I love that. Also, they re-signed Jaron Reed and Ernest Jones, so those aren't additions, but those are re-signings. And, I think Jaron Reed, good interior guy. You want to be able to make sure you keep him. That makes sense to me, especially since they lost a couple of interior guys. If you're going to keep one, I think it makes sense for him to be the guy you keep. Also, Ernest Jones, who they traded for last year, was pretty good in the Rams system, a system that doesn't really rely on linebackers, but he played well. Now he's going to be with the staying with the Seahawks as well. So ultimately, there's a lot of interesting moves, and I do think that while the quarterback situation is what most people are going to talk about, I do actually, I think my biggest criticism of this is the fact that they really haven't fix the guard situation. And listen, still plenty of time left in the offseason, right? For sure. But I do have some concerns there. I think the defense should be mostly about the same this year. I do wonder what's going to happen with Darnold, and I wonder what's going to happen with this receiving core. But ultimately, if they can't block, what does it matter? So we'll see what they do there. But yeah, ultimately, those are my thoughts on the Seahawks this offseason. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.